Did you know that the episode you are about to listen to is available on YouTube as a full multi-camera experience? Search for the Murder Police Podcast channel on YouTube. Subscribe and see what you have been missing.
I was like, Paris, I want you to see this to let you know I'm not kidding. I'm not making this up. I'm not, trying to pull one over on you. Here it is. Here's the lab report. 1 in 20 quintillion, 80 zeros. He's like, I don't believe that.
Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast, The Murder of Goldia Massey, Part 7.
And Steve just let him know. So
you think back how many times all of us and other people that have done this will agree. We put murderers in the front seat, or we took murderers down in something that didn't have a cage, or we went into their home and had that conversation. And what I'm getting at is that TV, again, I compare things to Hollywood and TV so much on the violence and everything, but how many murderers we dealt with that just went along with the program, or and I hope people don't misinterpret this, but we didn't saddle up ERU or SWAT, and it wasn't because we had tombstone courage, but knowing who they are is that's not where the fight's going to be. Now that doesn't mean it for all of them, and people who are barricaded in necessarily. That's a whole different ball of wax. But I always thought of. Again, at one thing to protect that non-custodial interview thing, how it was a casual ride, almost like an Uber ride to police departments. It was funny when you talk about that casualness of it. To me, it was like that. It was like most of the time it wasn't really amped up or super excited. It was like, okay, we're going, and they would go. And
we knew that we possibly could have a murder there.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But maybe it comes down to that rapport again, like you're getting back with Steve.
Yeah.
Is that the relationship you build is one of those things that keeps you safe and keeps everything from escalating into a higher degree.
Yeah. And not having lights and sirens and have his neighbors know, right?
Yes, exactly.
You got to respect the guy.
There we go.
Right.
Yeah, perfect.
It's human nature. Not if you disrespect me, I'm going to disrespect you.
Not so much respect, but I think a little bit of dignity. We were giving him dignity. You know what I mean? Right. We weren't trying to out him in front of everybody. We were doing what we had to do in a most discreet manner that we could possibly do it.
Yeah.
And I think that was his appreciation and probably why he really kind of went along with everything is we didn't come in there with guns blazing and our PAs going and calling him out.
You stay off that lizard brain. You stay off that amygdala.
We didn't need media there.
No, absolutely not.
A lot of police departments do nowadays.
Sure.
They don't need the radio. They don't need the media there. Right. They're gonna get a lot more sugar.
That's what this is about.
So he didn't try to dispute it and say, "You're wrong. I did not do this."
Oh, 100% he did. Yeah.
Oh, he did?
Oh, 100%.
But he knew when we came back the second time, he was so positive when we came back the second time. Let me back up. When we dropped him off, he knew if he saw us the second time, both of us together,
he was going to jail.
He was going to jail. And
no, that's what I mean. When you came back that second time, he was not disputing it
Stood
then?
strong.
No.
Really?
Never did it. Didn't do
he
it.
Still was saying
you all are
that.
crazy. I don't know where you're coming from.
But let
I
me
showed
get my
him the
stuff.
lab reports. I mean, it was. I was like, Paris, I want you to see this to let you know I'm not kidding. I'm not making this up. I'm not trying to pull one over on you. Here it is. Here's the lab report. 1 in 20 quintillion, 80 zeros. He's like, I don't believe that.
Her menstrual cycle was hard, is what he told us.
Really?
And at that
100%.
point, but what we
Am
had.
I right, Steve? That's what he told us. Her menstrual cycle was hard. It could have been on any wall.
And that DNA is just a fad.
But I think
that's what my grandmother says.
Yeah, of course.
What was most important is during that second search warrant, we got so much more that we did it in the first. when we went back and we were looking a lot more in depth, we found blood. We actually found blood that we could see.
Something not painted over.
No. So what happened?
So he tried to clean.
So what happened?
He cleaned with bleach in a lot of areas, and he painted a lot of areas. But as what many of us do, we're so exhausted trying to cover up the crime, we forget the minute details. Mm-hmm. And this was the most magnificent finding, was in a hallway at his bedroom, where your door opens and closes, where the hinges are.
On the back jamb of the door?
Yes.
So what had happened is he had closed the door, cleaned the door, but at the time that Goldie was assaulted and killed, the door was open. So on that back jamb, there was blood droplets all the way up the
entire thing.
The door was completely clean on the inside. Now we did, after we got it back and we looked at it, in a little bit better light, we could find places on the door that he'd have missed on the flat side of the door. But on that backside jam door where the hinges are, obvious blood droplets.
We count on them being so stupid sometimes. And I mean, that's what it's all about. I've always said it's not so much that detectives are smart. We wait for that bulb to flicker over their head and jump on them in the dark.
Yeah, everybody makes a mistake, right?
That's it.
Including detectives.
Yeah, amen.
We are human.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for us, we really didn't know where the crime happened, right? We thought that she was cut up in there, dismembered in there because of the blue star that we saw on the wall. But with what we found back in this little hallway nook that led to a couple rooms, there was obvious blood that came up at a pretty high. It wasn't spray, and we had Tim Russell, who does blood spatter with our FSU, look at it, and he was like, "Yeah, that's probably coming from a lower distance up onto the back of the door." So that was what we believed where she was assaulted initially, and then probably. Our theory is, we can't prove it, probably taken to the living room, tarp put down, dismembered, because obviously you're not bleeding at that point. You can contain within the tarp, and then the tarp taken out in her along with the carpeting. I mean, that's sort of our theory.
Right.
But we felt like he had assaulted her back near the bedroom in this little nook area that led to a couple bedrooms. It was a real confined space.
That's where you had, I guess, the spatter.
That's where we had the most,
exactly.
most amount of blood.
Right. And so now we're adding all kinds of liaison, right? So we're not doing this alone, and we go back to Zach. Steve and I do go back to Zach and explain to him, hey, we found evidence that Paris has murdered your mom, that she is dead at this point, that's why she didn't come back and get clothes. He literally breaks down. Mm-hmm. I remember this.
Yeah, he cried like a baby.
He did. And it does affect detectives. I'm not going to lie to you, because we considered him a suspect, right? And I'm getting goosebumps just telling you about this. But he is a suspect, and I don't feel bad about it, because later on I would have to pay the price when I'm testifying, and Steve is testifying. Steve needed to see his reaction. It's just part of the job, and we have to live through it. His sister, I remember telling his sister that Zach had nothing to do with it. She was relieved. It was a whole different kind of response. Yeah, Cheryl.
Yeah, Cheryl. I mean, she was just overwhelmed that Zach didn't have anything to do with it. And she was, in the beginning, she was sort of, she didn't know.
Anti-Zach. She was anti-Zach.
Yeah, if she thought that he may have had something to do with it. And in her mind, to feel that he didn't have anything to do, it sort of uplifted her some.
In her defense, you just don't know.
Right.
I mean, she's thinking the same things you all are thinking.
100%.
She's looking at the risk factors, his lifestyle, all those things. What a horrible place for a family member to be in. I mean, so God bless her too.
Yeah. And one thing, she always kept in contact with us. Always. It was probably once to every 10 days she would call. Mm-hmm. Where are we at? Mm-hmm. What are we doing? Can you tell me anything? I know I don't want to violate the integrity of the case. She was always on top of it.
Yep.
She really was, which is unusual for a family member.
She was a good sister, that's for sure. She kept us.
And you all responded.
Absolutely.
Oh, of course.
Please.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because that's a big complaint.
Well, you were our commander at the time. If she called you, I was very afraid I'd lose my job.
I'd be terrified. I scared myself most days.
Yes, you intimidate me, sir.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, that's the right thing to do, right?
Right.
And again, in these victims' families, one of the things that people miss is that contact thing and how important that is. So Zach, that was pretty moving, I guess, right? I mean,
sure.
Because I guess
I would say,
I guess he responded as a guy had lost his mom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, into a very horrific manner.
There we go.
Yeah, I have a little sympathy for him. I think Steve does too. I mean, the guy has been dealt a bad card.
There we go. Yeah.
Right. He and his mom did drugs together.
Well, and I think in looking at the big picture, he probably didn't like us in the beginning.
Right, sure.
We were pointing a finger at him. You know what I mean? So,
and especially Franz.
Yeah. And
if you're listening, Franz.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, those short fingers that Franz was pointing at him with. But I mean, for us to be able to go back and tell him, hey, we don't think you did it, but this is why we had to sort of do it the way that we did it. I think he understood that and he respected that. And that made us feel good.
Yeah.
Well, he's walking a lifestyle of very difficult challenges that are in opposition to what law enforcement.
Sure.
Right.
Now, have you all spoken with him since this time? I mean, we've got 9 years that's passed. Did he ever get out of his jail sentence?
He has. He's moved on. I think he and Samantha are still, together. I don't think they've ever married.
I don't know. I do not know.
Yeah. But there's another thing to this. So you can't just take this to trial, right? You have to know the cause of death.
For sure.
You don't have to have the motive in the state of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. You don't have to prove a motive, but you do have to have at least what they think is the cause of death. So being in homicide for a long time.
A mechanism of death.
Right.
Yeah.
Steve and I, and even Dave, have heard about the forensic pathology farm, anthropology farm.
It's the body farm at the University of Tennessee.
Right.
That was started by Dr. Bass. And we referenced Dr. Craig earlier. I think she did some, work down there as well. And in our time in my time at the coroner's office, working with Dr. Craig, she had introduced the body farm to us on a couple of other cases. And the work that they do down there is just absolutely phenomenal. The things that they come up with and the way that they come up with it. So we knew that we had an arm, we had a torso, and we wanted to figure out what happened. And so we made arrangements with the coroner's office, and they transported those parts down to the University of Tennessee to the body farm for us, and went down there and talked to. If I remember the medical examiner or the forensic anthropologist that helped us out, her name was Donnie Steadman.
It is,
and it just came to me, but
Luana and Riwana.
Yeah, we gave them the body parts, and we were like, so what happens here? And basically, they put them in big, huge crock pots.
Slow cook.
They boil. They basically cook all the flesh. I mean, I know this is a bit gruesome, but they deflesh all the bones. And what's important about that is they don't use any sharp instruments because they don't want it to put any markings on the bones that weren't there. So they use like plastic or soft instruments to remove all the flesh, all the cartilage, and everything off the bones because they're not interested in the flesh. They're interested in the bones.
Right. So if there's a sharp instrument mark on the bones, what does that mean?
Then that means that something was introduced into the body.
It could be a stabbing.
That's not natural. But what we were interested in was trying to figure out how was she dismembered, and what was just so incredibly interesting is they were able to look at her bones, and just by the action of the blade and the length between the blades and things like that, they were able to determine that she was actually cut up with a reciprocating saw, backwards and forwards motion, not circular. And at the time of the cut went directly through, nonstop. So it was Dr. Steadman's opinion that whoever used this tool was familiar with it because it never jammed, it never stopped, it went directly through. And if we think about Paris, he's a handyman, right?
Right.
So he knows how to use tools. So he goes directly through. So that was really, really neat. They were able to determine that it was a reciprocating saw.
We spent 2 days
back and forth
there,
motion.
And look, they showed us the bones. It was great. They magnified their technology. They magnified so we didn't have to get right on the bone. So I don't want your listeners to think that 5 heads were over this one bone. It was on a projector. We could see where, like, they would use an instrument to point out what they could see was the pattern of the saw. They explained it perfectly.
And they actually can go into these companies and know that, like, for instance, a DeWalt reciprocating saw makes so many passes.
The teeth of the reciprocating
and
saw.
the length of it in so many seconds to be able to determine what kind of blade that was used. It's incredible. It's incredible.
Yes. It was amazing for them to educate us on
Did
this.
he by chance say that a reciprocating saw was missing in his stolen?
Well, we took
So
a bunch.
what we said, what we did was we didn't have another search warrant. So we did search everything around his house and in the backyard.
In the shed that he had, in his van.
Yes.
He had tons of tools in his van.
Yes. So that brings us back to the landlord of Paris Charles. Remember, at the original point of this interview, we started talking about when Steve noticed there was no carpet, it was down to the subflooring. If you're a detective and you want to be consistent and you're not going to let things go, and we used to call Davey a bulldog, if you're not going to let that go, you're just going to shake your head. That's what we did. I will be proud to say this. I followed Davey's lead. We called the landlord and said, okay, when we searched originally on this date for Paris's apartment, did he actually contact you and ask you for a reduction in rent? We didn't tell him what he was doing. Did he ask you for a reduction in rent? And did he ask you for any repairs? And he said, when I first rented to him, he was going to replace the floor, but he never did. And that was 2 years prior to him renting. And then all of a sudden we said, well, when we went in on the second interview, on the second search warrant, when we went on February or whatever the second search warrant was, he had piles of hardwood in packaging. He said, oh yeah, he was going to replace the floor when he first moved in, but he never did. I just thought he forgot about it. So all of a sudden now, after Goldia Massey has been murdered, what we assume dismembered in his apartment, he's replacing the floor. So the landlord was subpoenaed to testify in this trial. I don't know what to say about his testimony, but I will say the consistency of what Paris did and what the landlord said kind of didn't match.
No.
Am I safe in saying that?
I would agree with that. Yeah. Yeah. I think that there was definitely some issues with what the landlord was telling us as opposed to what we saw and what we discovered as far as the flooring and things of that nature.
Do you think there was a motive in that, or
no?
or just
loyalty.
I think there was a bit of loyalty.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, because he had been working for him. He had been doing. Not only was he working on his apartments, but Paris and also the landlord had told us that he was working on other properties that the landlord owed. So I think there was a bit of loyalty there.
Possibly.
And maybe the fact that he just didn't want to believe that he did it, That's always
real too.
Because I think Paris Charles worked for this landlord's father for several years before the landlord had taken over.
Yeah, I think so. So.
Mm-hmm.
So I just, there's
yeah,
deniability there, right?
Yeah, plausible at least.
I think at that point, after that we had gotten everything, our results back from the body farm, we were just kind of prepping for trial. Everything went quickly as opposed to most normal murder cases. I mean, we were. That
was the quickest I've ever been to trial in years on a homicide.
No kidding.
We went to trial.
I don't know why or what happened.
I think I charged him in February, and we went to trial that September. So,
Lord, that's quick.
Yeah.
That's quick.
And it was, we got our subpoenas and we started preparing for trial, getting everything together. Luana and Rewa were the prosecutors in the case and did an excellent job.
Outstanding.
What kind of sentence did he get?
He got found guilty, and he wound up getting 35 years for the murder, and I think he got 12 months for the abuse of a corpse. But it ran consecutive. So,
and was likely still denying it. The whole time during 100%. Trial.
And I remember, if you'll remember, when we interviewed Paris, he was, and if you watch the interviews, he had a bald head with a little bit of a beard. And by the time we went to trial, he looked like Santa Claus. I mean, his hair was long.
He came in a walker.
He had a huge beard going. Yeah. But he'd always told us he was a biker too, but that went along with all of his stories and things of that nature. But you really need to watch his interview to get a feel for.
We'll try to take a peek at that and probably plug that in. It could have already happened by the time we're talking about this. Is that we'll look at that and put some snippets in to see who he was. So, what spoke to y'all in this? Was there anything we talked in the beginning about what stood out? Now, hot wash it like you're done with it. Did it leave any big impressions on you moving forward on how you would handle cases differently, or anything really learned in this?
For me, it was to not really take anything for granted, especially missing person reports, because, and we talked about this earlier, they're so easy to look over, but they're so important because those are the big ones. I mean, in my time up there, we experienced so many missing persons reports that actually turned into murders. The Sharon Cave missing persons that turned into a murder, the Alex Johnson missing persons that turned into murder, the Goldia Massey missing person. Those are only 3 examples of missing person reports that got reported, but of the probably 3,000 missing person reports that were actually filed in my time up there, you can't overlook anything. You have to be so detail oriented.
That's it.
That's the thing that I really focused on, and I felt like, there were days that I would overlook that stuff, and because of this case, I'm like, that's a good lesson learned. Not to overlook things, not to take things for granted, and just because they're missing doesn't mean they don't want to be found. There's
a lot of families, Steve, that when they hear you say they'll take comfort knowing that detectives believe that.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of solace taken in that we knew up there that it could lead to major problems if you didn't, and we wanted to correct those problems from the forefront.
Fantastic.
So
I would add on to that don't wait what you see on TV where you have to wait 24, 48 hours to report your loved one missing. That's a misnomer. I think if you are adamant that something is unusual about the pattern of your loved one, report it, at least report it. And the detective will have that, if it's a good detective, will have that gut feeling, yeah, we probably should jump on this right away. Even though Goldie was reported several weeks after she was missing, the detectives didn't wait to find out something was unusual.
Well, and even when, and I can see the delay, but from what I gathered, even her son, Zach, when he reported it, he provided the risk factors immediately. Am I correct in that?
He did.
So he was pretty clear in that. And I know at some point you look at that maybe as suspiciously, because we could say he could overload information
with the drug information. He didn't want to come forth with that, right? Yeah. It's a personal thing.
But he still provided some of those things about her involvement in some of the allegations of fraud and check writing and things like that. So
and I think even Zach was behind the ball though, in reporting, because he was getting information from Paris that that wasn't true. So I think that even he probably had learned it prior, but didn't really think about it until he was like, this isn't adding up.
Right.
I need to call.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is what this guy told me.
Right.
And this doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So the longer you delay, the more difficult it gets for detectives.
And provide lots of information. We've talked about that on this podcast before, about how you have to really you have to be very exposed. You have to tell about those intimate things that you can't wait till something goes wrong and say, oh yeah, they did deal mid-level drug dealing. That, I know that's embarrassing, but you have to let people know that off the bat, because that's where the risk factors are going to come from.
100%. That's where
I'm going to get even deeper. Even if there was a family dynamic where, and I don't know if you feel comfortable putting this out there, but if there was insensual relationships, but you still did have nothing to do with this, don't hesitate. You may have to admit it. Don't hesitate if you want the true results.
Yeah, because that's going to lead. There's the rabbit hole. When you stumble on that,
Michaela Mahone.
That's it.
Don't do it.
Yeah, good point. And good point, because it creates a complete rabbit hole that everybody's going to shift and go down. That was horrible.
Weeks and weeks of investigation when they could have gone elsewhere.
Yeah, true. Very true. Very true. Anything else y'all?
I would say lastly, what spoke to me, and I think what really speaks to me with a lot of the murders that we work are just the people and the families that we worked with. I mean, that I've said for a long time, awards don't mean anything. Christmas cards do. You know, to get that Christmas card from a family, man, that means everything.
Yeah. I still go to Walmart. Steve, I see you getting emotional. You're right. Mm-hmm. You're right. I still go to Walmart with a homicide that happened here. I still go to Walmart, and her aunt, and I won't speak about the victim, her aunt still hugs me at the photographs section. It's like, that's $1 million to me.
Somewhere in the attic.
20 years of experience.
I think somewhere in the attic, I've got a box that has cards and stuff like that. And I've said the same thing, that nothing speaks to you more than those people.
No.
And the idea that you didn't make it all right, but you provided answers, right? And you helped them start to metabolize the worst thing. You started out when we started the podcast, it's the worst thing they're going to deal with in life.
Sure.
That's what this whole thing is about. It's about those people. It's anything other than that doesn't really matter at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Thank you all very much. Do you want to take us out?
Yeah, thank you guys so much. This case was really interesting with a lot of unexpected twists and turns. And thank you all so much for coming out. Steve, I'm so glad you've come. I hope you have more cases to bring to the table.
I appreciate the opportunity. I really enjoyed myself. Thanks a lot for having me.
And Chris, thank you so much for coming again.
I'd do it anytime you ask.
Thank you. And to Goldie's family, we send our respects for their loss. And you know, like the gentleman said, if you have a missing person, please don't hesitate. Give those details. Every little bit helps as quick as you can get it out there. So thank you, gentlemen, and thank you to our listeners.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for having us.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims, so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about our presenters, and a link to the official Murder Police podcast merch store, where you can purchase a huge variety of Murder Police podcast swag. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed caption for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police podcast and you will find us. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. Make sure you set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.